What's good, guys? I'm back with another video on fighting game psychology, and today we're going to talk about flowcharts and mind games. I'm sure most of you are familiar with these terms, or at least have seen them used, so I will be talking about the more intricate details of flowcharting and mind games, and not so much about the basics. When speaking of flowcharts, most people will attribute a negative connotation to what the flowchart is, and honestly that doesn't have to be the case, because there are what I like to call good flowcharts, which is basically just, a solid game plan, and there's also the bad flowcharts, which is usually just a bunch of gimmicks, which can of course catch unsuspecting people off guard, but are usually very punishable and not really something you should rely on as your main game plan. So for the following example, let's assume you have Bardock on your team. First, you try to get in using his assist, and then you use your other assist to force a mix-up on your opponent. Once you've opened up your opponent, you do a combo, you build around 1.5 bars of meter, and then, you get your Oki set up, and then probably you're going to land another hit, and after that hit, you do a combo, and then you DHC into a level 3. I'm sure we've seen this happen, or did this ourselves if we're Bardock players, plenty of times, because it's something which we should be doing, and it's a flowchart, but it's an effective and a good flowchart, something that, you're supposed to be doing. It should be your game plan. On the other hand, an example for a bad flowchart would be someone who always does a backdash into a lariat after finishing their block string. So, it's a very punishable option, and people tend to not punish it the first time, but if someone always does it, then it's basically just a flowchart which can be abused, but can also be really effective against bad players. The main difference between a good and a bad flowchart here is that the good flowchart will be formed around macro decisions, whereas the bad flowchart will mostly be a repetitive string of bad micro decisions. Macro decisions are usually not directly related to the small specific encounters which happen during a match. They're more about, the big picture. They're more about how you're going to use your resources, like assists or meter, when you're going to tag your characters out, under what circumstances, and basically just your overall game plan, really. Making correct macro decisions will usually be a lot more important than what people give it credit for, and that's not to say that micro decisions and the choices you make there are not important or not going to decide a match, but having just a good game plan and having good macro decision making is way more important. That said, micro decisions are also very important. Things such as which combo routes to take or which setups to do after a level 3 knockdown, amongst other things. This is also where mind games will come into play very heavily, since mind games will usually decide the outcome of those situations where micro decisions must be made. I like to separate mind games into different levels or layers, because this is what makes it easiest to understand them. Level 1 is basically just doing the option which loses to the least amount of options that your opponent can do. So the perfect example would be doing a safe jump meaty after a level 3 knockdown. This will beat most of your opponent's options and will, give you continued pressure, and will only lose to very select options such as wake up reflect or wake up spark. Against most players, you will want to stick to this option since they won't be thinking too far ahead. Level 2 is something which will be slightly more useful against a bit better players, since it basically just tries to counter them countering your option. I know it sounds complicated, but it's really not all that, so just bear with me. Sticking to our previous example of the hard knockdown level 3, the level 2 option would be to bait the spark. So you know that their sparking will beat your save jump, so you basically fake the save jump and then you backdash and then bait their sparking with whatever move you have that baits it. Most characters have a way to deal with it, and that's basically it. In most cases, level 2 is going to be the highest layer that you want to go for mind games, since after that it's really just going back to level 1, because if you can counter their counter, then they can read that and just do what they originally wanted to do, which will counter you. But In some cases against really sharp, skilled opponents, you will have to dig a bit deeper and go into that level 3 of mind games, and I'll explain how to do that now. The level 3 of mind games will usually come down to you expecting your opponent to be able to react to your level 2 of mind games, and just decide on the fly whether he will try to counter you or not. So let's stick to our previous example of getting the hard knockdown level 3, and let's make it a bit more specific and talk about Android 16's level 3. So you get the hard knockdown, and then you have the option to bait the spark with, for example, backdash into 5H, right? So 5H looks very similar to the lunging command grab, which is 236M. So if you backdash and the opponent thinks that you will bait the spark, then you will do a 5H, then it will just get blocked and you get nothing out of it. But if you backdash and do the 236M, then you will basically throw the opponent who is expecting you to bait the spark. Getting to this level of mind games usually assumes that your opponent will be very, very good at the game, and it also relies a lot on visual trickery because of that. So most of the times you're going to be landing these mix-ups, it's really only going to hit the players who are playing reactionary and trying to react to you doing things. So, controversial opinion incoming. I think you should only play mind games once you realize your opponent is on the level, or if you're playing against a known player. Because if you play mind games or go past level 1 against players who are obviously not very good, then most of the time you're going to be doing more harm than good to yourself. And obviously if you're playing someone who's shown that they're good, or someone who's on the level, then that means you should play mind games because they're going to be inevitably a big part of the outcome of the match. But otherwise it's better to just stick to level 1 and stick to your good flowcharts, stick to your game plan, and just power through. So this leads me to some advice for people who would like to enter Dragon Ball or any other fighting game tournaments, and that's really to develop a solid, good game plan. Instead of practicing combos or setups for hours on end, when you go in training mode, try to develop a nice game plan that will win you the games, and just stick to that when you get to the tournament. Unless, of course, you meet like a really, really good player, then start developing those mind games. But against worse players, just stick to the game plan and power through. And anyway, that's it for today's video, so see you next time.